Hey, welcome to the Automation Insider. I'm your host, Joe McGrath. And this week, we want to look at starting small, how to scale operations with robotics. This is a pretty interesting topic, something I deal with on my day-to-day. And I'm absolutely sure our guest, Matt Kelly, also works with this topic constantly. So Matt, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Appreciate it, Joe. It's a pleasure. Matt Kelly, Director of Business Development at HAI Robotics. And yes, we definitely face this topic on a daily basis. The market is screaming for something small, something that they can start and scale with. So very excited to be a part of this with you.
Very cool. Now, I think that in general, like one of the most common questions I get into when I'm concepting, iterating through design with customers is scaling. Like, is it future planning? Like how small can it go? How big can it go? Like, is this going to be the right purchase for me now and for later, right? And I think what's most interesting about robotics is that ability to punch down past like the minimum entry point that a lot of traditional technologies have. So I want to talk about what kind of small customers might be looking at the type of technology. I don't know if you have any examples of that.
Yeah, I do. I think certainly small customers are a good fit. You know, a startup, somebody who doesn't have a lot of capital, but they know they need to automate, because in order for them to be successful, in order for them to provide the value to their customer and do so expeditiously, they need some type of automation. It's hard to rely on pure manual operations to grow and grow quickly, especially when you're competing against Amazon and Walmart, who are highly automated and been doing so for decades. So we see a lot of success with startups. We have a company out in Salt Lake City who, you know, after moving 7 times in 4 years because they kept running out of space, they finally threw their hands up and said, hey, we've got to automate. We've got to figure out how to get denser in the square footage that we have today, and also provide our employees with a better environment to actually pick, pack, and ship their customers' orders. So that's certainly part of it. But I think we see a lot of success with big brands, with big companies who, for whatever reason, you know, automating the within the 4 walls is just not a priority. And so they haven't deployed or dedicated the capital to do so. And so they too want to start small and know that in 3 to 5 years, that initial investment can grow with them as the business case solidifies and their board of directors maybe gets on board with this type of capital outlay. So, you know, we see kind of two different successful paths there, both startups and also the big name brands.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I've noticed that there's a couple of things that can make a big company look like a small company. And one of those is maybe they just don't have a lot of SKUs that fit that traditional mold, but there's this one chunk over here, this little part of their business that would be perfect for automation, right? That kind of makes them look in the data like a small company might look. And then there's this other interesting thing I've seen crop up at least a couple of times a year with different clients. And it's a big company, but it's broken up into a lot of smaller segments, or it's broken up into a lot of like regional distribution centers. This feels like sort of a hardware sort of thing. But like it's a large company, but they have lots of places around the country, around the world. And each of those in and of itself isn't a huge opportunity to automate, right? So like they have they want to automate, but no individual site has enough scale to justify the old traditional stuff that we've been putting in for 20 years.
Yeah, dude, that's a great call out. You know, even some of these big name brands, and maybe they have 10 to 12 DCs right throughout North America, but then they have thousands of other regional DCs, and it's usually those that are often forgotten. They will, you know, dedicate capital to the big ones because they know they have to, but then the small ones where maybe they have a 30 to 40 person workforce doing manual pick operations, those are forgotten. And I think part of it is because maybe they used a big system, a shell system in those big DCs for $150, $200 million. And in their mind, they're thinking, well, we can't afford that in the small regionals. And who can provide that same type of value in a goods to person, high dense, high throughput type of application in the small regionals? And I think, you know, those are the type of customers we're looking to really evangelize with our technology, where they can start small. They can replace maybe a few labor points and provide a better environment for the rest of their labor and really enable their labor to be more efficient, but not have to spend millions of dollars to do so. So that's where we're also seeing a lot of success for sure.
So, okay, so we kind of outline like who may be interested in these fairly small scale systems that are actually a very recent addition to the marketplace, I would say. what are the benefits of really small systems? So, but go ahead and take a swag at it. I have some ideas about this as well.
Well, I mean, the benefits of a small system is risk. I think that's the first hurdle you have to get over is what does 5 years from now look like? And when you're investing in a technology that takes a few years to implement and costs $100 million, you better get it right, because if you get it wrong, that's bad. So I think the benefit for a lot of the technologies that came to market in 2015, 2016 is that they have a very low risk of entry point. You know, you don't need a lot of infrastructure. You don't need to dedicate a tremendous amount of space or on-site resources to implement it. And so I think just from a risk management perspective, it makes the decision a little less cumbersome. But I think also it provides flexibility for the operation to grow or to evolve. And sometimes that may be to contract. You know, we have a lot of customers who, hey, we're decreasing this part of our operation, and we're worried to invest in automation because in 5 years, maybe we're going to change and pivot. And so, you know, for those customers, when we can provide value where, hey, you know what, we can tear this down, move it to a new facility, if that's the journey you're on, that provides a lot of comfort as well to kind of take that first leap into automation, knowing that there's a pivot that we as the OEM and the automation provider can make with that customer, should that be necessary.
That idea of like future planning, I think is a really important one. And I think there's another interesting facet of like these robotic based systems is that, and I talk about this on occasion, but they have a smaller increment of purchase. So I can buy like a little bit of robotic capacity, and a little bit might be, I can add one robot to the system, or I can add a little section of rack over here. And it's actually pretty painless to do. The lead times are fairly short. Once you have like kind of the main system in place, you've already integrated your software. You can add just a little bit at a time. I've done a number of mini load projects or crane projects, and you have to add an aisle, or you have to add an extra 60-foot tall crane into an existing aisle, which is a wild thing to do. And you really, it goes back to that shuttle example you used. They're awesome, but you got to have all your ducks in a row. So, yeah.
For sure. No, that's important. Like, it's not just the initial barrier of entry with that initial investment, but it is the incremental scale that the technology can endure. And, you know, I often tell customers, why don't you plan and expect, and we'll design for adding an additional workstation or two. No cost to do that. We're just going to leave space, and in our plan together, in our journey of automation and value, we know that we can add very quickly an additional workstation, you know, for way under $50,000, right? Versus, as you called out, a shuttle system, you're adding several $1 million to that automation system if you did want to expand it.
Yep, and some of those expansions, like you're buying extra storage when you buy the expansion. That's the mini load example, right? And the robotics-based solutions I've worked with, and HAI is an excellent example of this. I can buy just capacity, like just throughput, or I can buy just storage, or I can leave my throughput and storage the same and just add workstations and adjust my process outside of the system. So like the amount of flexibility is also like pretty tremendous. And we're seeing a lot of success with that, working that into concepts. Shift gears just a little bit. Let me see here. What are some kind of key distinctions that you see, and this is before we get to this next topic, between like a conventional type of automation and a robotics-based system? So, you know, like a HAI System 3, something like that.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a very broad swath of what is in the definition of conventional. But, you know, I would say, well, let's just take an example of a pick module. With conveyance, right? This is a monument that you're investing in, and it's not cheap, to be honest. A lot of people, they think manual is the cheaper option, and it ends up being quite expensive and a big capital expense that doesn't provide the kind of value that a robotics-based system would provide. So I think that's kind of the first distinction is that these robotic systems that we offer and some of our close competitors offer, these are not something that you're going to be stuck to. Right? If you all of a sudden, you know, went bankrupt tomorrow, these can leave the facility. Whereas a pick module, you're not tearing that down. And, there's a tremendous amount of engineering that goes into some of those more conventional type of MHE that a robotic system, does not require. And I think that provides a great benefit as well to a customers looking for that flexibility, looking for that lower entry point, not only at a cost basis, but just, hey, how quick can this go live? How quick can we be up and running with this solution so it can provide value to this operation? And, I think people don't quite understand. I think they get nervous with robots, right? They think robots, we're not quite ready for that. They're, they're thinking of Judgment Day with the Terminator and things roaming around, taking control of their operation. And that's not the case, right? A conveyor system, again, you better have all those ducks in a row, because once you implement these things, they are there. Whereas robotics, you can move it. It can change throughout the facility as the business evolves and the workflows change. So when you think about that flexibility and think about how your business is going to evolve, whether it's up or down or sideways, I think you've got to think about what am I investing in and how can it change with me?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Like this, maybe it's like a misperception of complexity. I put some PIC modules in, and like there's all kinds of fire safety, life safety. Like there are structures that are supporting humans, and so they've got to be like up to every code and or beyond. You have to like air condition them sometimes or get airflow up there, get people up there. The floors have to be like pretty great. There's a lot of things that have to go right. You have to elevate a conveyor and then bring that product back down. So you're moving things up and down through not simple means. Oftentimes, there's even designing a staircase and getting that permitted and stamped and like everything through. Like it's not trivial, although it looks like the conventional, simple to do thing. And then in comparison, like a robotic system, like you kind of just put the robots on the floor and stand up some racks. There might be some fire suppression, sure, but in my experience, it's like infinitely less complicated to move forward with a system like that.
And there's definitely way less failure points too. When a conveyor system goes down, or any of the traditional type of automation, when it goes down, it's down. And I think the robotic system, when you're dealing with a fleet where you can lose one bot or two bots and still stay in production, hitting the design rate, that too provides, especially approaching a peak season where you can't afford to be down for hours system wide. I think that also is a very important piece of the puzzle, and oftentimes a misperception. Like you said, this is deemed a complicated thing, and really it's probably the less risk decision that an organization can make as they're thinking about how to automate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now let's talk about organizations that have automated. And now they're ready to scale. And there's kind of a couple of different versions of this here. So there's a brownfield and there's a greenfield, right? So I've already built some stuff. I have a building that's running. Maybe I have a PIC module in there, a little bit of conveyors, a rack, and I say, hey, I want to automate. Additionally, like is robotics the right move there? And then later on, I'm going to ask you about like comparing that to a greenfield. So keep that in your back pocket.
Yeah, I think robotics might be the almost the only move, unless you wanted to expand the PIC module for some crazy reason. I think the only thing you can do from there is let's find the most flexible solution to support that existing MHE. And I come upon this all the time where it's like, hey, we've already bought this, horizontal carousel. We've already bought the BLM. We have this PIC module. Is there something you can provide that can supplement this? Because we're not willing to rip it out right now. We spent tens of millions of dollars. I had to convince the board. I put my job on the line. And, is there something you can do to help us get a little bit more out of it? Extend the life of it a little bit further, sweat that asset. And I think that's where robotics, especially the kind of more flexible robotics that we offer, really can add value. Whereas a traditional shuttle system or even some of the cube-based storage systems, they're really going to come in and start to replace a lot of that technology and struggle to support existing MHE within brownfield. So I don't want to say so boldly it's the only option. I think there's certainly others out there. But I think when you have monuments like that you invested in a brownfield, I think robotics like our system is definitely the way to go.
I have a friend that says that taking out a huge capital purchase like that is a resume generating event. especially if you're the one that fought for it. So like I definitely I understand a lot of those motivations. So what different decisions would you make designing a robotic system in like a greenfield versus a brownfield environment? So like if I have a pick module or if I don't have a pick module, how does that conversation go differently with the customer?
Well, I mean, I think it varies, right? I think that's definitely a big topic. I think one of the pieces is how do we start small and scale? In a brownfield, it is an existing operation, so you have to think, what kind of impact is this going to have in the existing operation? Because it does need to stay in production. It is an active facility. It is fulfilling customers' needs out of that facility. So, how can we figure out from an implementation perspective where we start and where we end? And what does that disruption look like for the customer? In a greenfield, it really doesn't matter. I mean, it is kind of a wide open space. There's no disruption. Maybe you can go big right out of the gate. And I think in a brownfield, you're really looking for what is our lowest point of entry from an implementation? How do we get you live, right? So you start to see value out of the system, but then we have a plan to scale where there is minimal disruption to the overall facility. I think I probably have more conversations about how much disruption does this have to our existing operation than anything as it relates to brownfield implementations and what does that look like.
So maybe to like summarize a little bit, like maybe the big deal there is like, can I use that small increment of purchase, like those little steps to add into a brownfield, whereas a greenfield is not necessarily the concern, but a brownfield, it absolutely is a concern. The weekend cut-ins, right?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest hurdle in a brownfield is in a greenfield is moving from the brownfield to the greenfield at some point, once it is up and running and ready to accept all the inventory. And then in a brownfield too, I think you've got to take into account, what kind of existing challenges there are in the floor, right? Is the floor beat up? Do we need to do floor, remediation? What kind of fire suppression exists already in there? I think all those things have to be taken into account as well.
Yep. So that kind of leads into a little bit of a conversation about like customer readiness, and we've danced around this some. Like there's obviously fire suppression and building readiness type of items, and if you're in a brownfield, there's going to be like change management sort of topics, and in a little bit into thinking about like what customers could benefit from this type of automation. Are people mentally ready for the decision of adding robots into an operation, right? Because if it's the first time you put a robotic system in, like it does sound kind of Judgment Day, right? To borrow a phrase from you. So talk to me a little bit about customer readiness, or maybe some of the adventures you've had helping customers, get ready for a system.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there, right? I think you hit the nail on the head about all the fire suppression, all the engineering concerns, but then you have a person thing, right? You have people who now have to understand what they're getting. And a lot of the employees, they do fear losing their job. And I think it's very important from a change management perspective for us as the technology provider, and you guys as the integrator to provide, coaching to a customer, and thus to their employees, that this is really here to supplement and make your life easier. Instead of walking 5 to 7 miles a day throughout a forward pick area to grab items, and maybe you're only grabbing 50 to 70 items, now you can grab 300 items and stay in one place. And so the foot pain, the ankle pain that you have at the end of the day, that is now certainly assuaged tremendously by automation. And I think I come upon so many operations where they have turnover that you wouldn't believe. I mean, 40% is kind of the average. I think that's low in a lot of areas. I was at I was at a facility the other day as a 3PL for apparel, and they're turning over people every 2 weeks. And that's a tremendous burden on the operation, but it also it's a call out to, hey, this is not a great place to work. And I think automation is really there to provide a better environment to the employee and keep your good labor, your reliable labor happy, and allow them to kind of grow in their career. Now they have the experience to work with an advanced automation system instead of, walking around with a push cart grabbing, shirts off of a, hand stack shelf. So, I think the human element is probably the biggest hurdle in a brownfield. And then, you have your labor watching this system go live next to them, and they're terrified of it. And I think that type of a topic has to be addressed head on, and employees need to be heard, but also, to be convinced that this is something really good and impactful for them.
Yeah, I think, man, those are some excellent points. Like, it's interesting from the manager perspective. Everybody knows that if we're not competitive enough, like, this is going to cost jobs in our facility. But it's hard when you're the one slinging cases all day to internalize that. And I've seen a lot of success with folks that bring pickers in to the kind of the tail end of that design process. Hey, help me dial in this workstation. And if they have a little bit of buy-in, like, I think it's suddenly that's a lot easier conversation to have, or like it's a lot more meaningful to them. And oftentimes these are the systems, like these jobs on these, like maybe tending these robotic systems, are the ones that people bid into because they are significantly more comfortable. Like, we spend a bunch of time designing a workstation for ergonomics because you have to be there all day. And man, they're way more comfortable than riding around in a walkie, almost getting hit by your buddy. Like that's absolutely. And I think the point about like, I don't want to say like adding a nice line to your resume, but like giving this person an opportunity to work with, like, these are actually advanced robotics. They have like a tremendous amount of engineering behind them, and like they're very interesting systems. Like, getting the opportunity to work with those versus, again, riding around in a walkie all day. Like, I can't help but think that this is definitely a career advancement for a lot of folks if they take advantage of it.
Oh, for sure. And there's something you mentioned there that I want to call out because, I think oftentimes, in sales and solutioning, we focus on the engineering team. We focus on the quote decision makers. And I think we forget quite often about the person doing the pick. And they can be your best friend, your worst enemy. Their handling time is important. It's very important, as I coach my team all the time, understand the stakeholders, because everyone is important, especially when you're dealing with a system like this. Not only, is it about, signing the contract, right? But it's about implementing, it's about going live, it's about providing value over the long term. Our work is not done at contract signature, and it's certainly not done at go live. Our work continues with the customer over the long term. And that includes the person doing the pick, it includes the manager managing them, and it includes the board of directors who are seeing the financial benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we got into that piece of the conversation, because that's a ton of insight real quick there. Let's do a real, I don't know, basic one here. Let's talk about the cost of a system versus the return. Just super high level. What do you typically see in regards to that? Now, you don't have to use any specific numbers for any specific customers, but how does that conversation tend to go when you're looking at a robotics-based system? And I often compare them to like traditional systems for my customers, but I think you have a little bit different perspective, from HAI.
Yeah, I think we see two major buckets of benefit right out of the gate from a financial perspective. It is, labor improvement. For every labor point, how many orders can you get out more than you could the day before? So from manual, hey, we were getting out 50 per labor point. Now we can get out 300, 350. Okay, there's a lot of benefit there. Maybe that triggers a headcount reduction in the picking operation. You move labor to other parts of the operation, or they just don't return, right? There is turnover that happens naturally. But then there's also a benefit on reducing the cost per square foot by shrinking how much inventory is consuming of the square footage in the operation. So if you can take, 100,000 square feet worth of inventory and shrink it down to 25,000 square feet, there's a lot of savings there. The cost per square foot has never been higher in real estate and warehousing real estate. So that's certainly a big benefit there. But I think there's also soft costs, and we touched on them earlier, right? The turnover rate is very expensive. The error rate is very expensive. I was at a facility a few weeks ago. They told me their error rate was $3 per mispick, and they had hundreds of mispicks a day. And, I asked them, well, do you have a number? I mean, can you give me a number monthly and quarterly on this? And they kind of couldn't, right? They weren't even really tracking that cost. And so there's a lot of soft costs that us on the front end of these decisions can coach the customer to gather. And hey, there's other things. It's not just headcount, and it's not just cost per square foot. I mean, there's other things in the operation that robotic systems are really tailored to address in a serious way. And I think those often slip through the cracks in that ROI analysis, and you've got to call them out.
I definitely see a lot of conversations. People have kind of danced around the square footage savings. And some of my friends in consulting bring this up a lot. Like, if you didn't have this more dense technology, right, more throughput per square foot, then what would you do? And oftentimes they say, well, we get another building. And like we always think of, like, on a spreadsheet, it's like this many dollars per square foot. Cool. In real life, this is a whole 600,000 square foot area you've leased. Like that's an increment. You don't get value on it until much later on. It's wild. And a lot of times, just looking at the labor, it looks okay. When you add in like the pain that is going to cause to ship product over there, now you have a split process. Like, man, like it makes a lot more sense to do more with less.
Yeah, I don't want to say getting a new building is always a mistake, but it seems to be a strange, answer to the question of, okay, you're out of space now. Are you ready to automate? They go, oh, well, no, we're going to find a new building. And then they delay exploring automation until they find a new building. And then 2 years later, you call them back and you say, well, hey, are you ready? Did you find a new building? Well, we're still looking for one. It's like, well, okay, you just lost 2 years of improvement in your current operation while you look for this magic building that's going to solve your problems. And then 2 years later, it's automated. So you just burned all this time by not addressing the facility that you have, the assets you've already invested in that are your operation today, providing value to your customers. And I think, it's so easy to forget that, just deal with what's in front of you, because that's enough. And then we'll deal with a greenfield building later on. But that later on can be a decade. So
that's tough. And the entire time you're looking for a new building, you're waiting to do that decision. Your competitors are very likely making a lot of progress. And that's tough. That's a tough position to be in. All right. Very cool. Okay. So last topic, and then I'll let you go. But let's talk about planning for the future. Right. So we hinted about this a whole bunch. But if I were to walk in to your office and I say, hey, I want to build a building now and I want it to grow 20% in 5 years, what advice would you give me about designing a system in that regards?
Yeah, I mean, I would say let's kind of design one that, gives you a little bit of a buffer, but we have a plan for the future. So let's not design, the full boat for the future. You're not ready for that. I would say let's start with what makes sense today and for a year out. Assuming that all of a sudden, something major could happen. We see this all the time where all of a sudden a 3PL gets a new customer, right? Or an apparel line, they get a new clothing line. Now, all of a sudden they don't have any room to put these SKUs. I think let's assume there could be something crazy in the first 12 months of the system being used, but then let's not over design it at that point. Let's plan for, adding rows, adding workstations, adding bots if necessary. I think the two easiest things to do is to add a workstation and to add bots. It's a little bit more of an undertaking to add a row of racking, but even then that's not that big of a deal because you still stay in production with the current system and you just add on. So I think that's one of the easiest objections to overcome, right? Is that future uncertainty. When you have a technology that's modular and scales easily, you don't need to go wild with designing for the future like you would with a shuttle system. And you kind of mentioned that earlier, Joe. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always find myself asking this question, like, well, how do you think things will change in 5 years, right? And like, I know that no one's going to have a great answer to this, right? Some businesses are a little bit more stable. They have a little bit better view of 5 years out, and some don't. And a lot of times we end up, this is just kind of my take on it. I'll go design something really big and I'll start paring back, right? That way I don't put the whole thing in a corner and I can't expand out in a couple other directions. But yeah, like the ability to like cut back to a very small starting point, I think is, it's a thing that hasn't existed until fairly recently, like the scale that we're talking about. And it's super powerful for folks. Like, yeah, like you could start here. This is a couple of workstations in this. And if you grow, right, if that new line comes in, or if a competitor X goes out of business and you end up picking up that market share, like this is a plan to get you there, right? It is a powerful sales tool, and it's also pretty powerful for the customer to have that in their back pocket and say, listen, I think I'm actually pretty safe, depending on whatever happens in the future. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, and you got to look too at the lead time as well. I mean, we have a technology that can be live in 6 to 8 months from the time of contract signature. That's unique as well. I mean, so if all of a sudden the business changes post peak in 2024 and you need to be live before peak of 2025, that's no problem. And I think that's also a big advantage. It allows companies to maybe fly a little closer to the sun than you would have to if you had to implement a shuttle system where it is several years of implementation. So I think all those things are very critical and provide that kind of flexibility that I think business leaders are looking for as they think about how to deploy their capital.
Yeah, even the last generation of like robotics and solutions, like a lot of it was 12 to 18 months to get it running, and they're great solutions, but like once you go past that 12-month mark, the finance folks start getting real squirrely, right? Like, so I have to give you money now and I don't get any return until a year and a half. Like that's a tough decision. When you say, oh, we can do it in 6 months, we can do it in 8 months. Like this is much more like reasonable time frame. And then to upgrade, like it's not another 6 months to upgrade it, right? It's significantly faster. It kind of probably depends on the time of the year, but just adding a bot, like I just need to get one bot. Right now, I've got just a little bit more capacity in the system, right?
Yeah, and adding that capacity tends to be a lower, decision-making process, right? You're not looking at $1 million investment or $2 million investment to add capacity. It's a couple $100,000, and that typically will fall on the budget of the managers of that facility. It doesn't have to go to the board all the time. So that also provides, from a procurement perspective, a lot of flexibility and comfort to make these kind of decisions for a modular technology that can scale as they grow, and knowing that they can make decisions up or down as needed.
Yep. Very reactive operations team. It's cool stuff. All right. Well, Matt, thank you very much for letting me pick your brain today on this topic. I think it's a topic that I deal with a ton. I know you do. I think a lot of folks out there are going to be pretty interested in learning about, like the lower end of scaling all the way down. It's very cool. Any last practical advice for the folks that might be watching the Automation Insider out there?
Yeah, don't be scared to take the leap into robotic automation. I mean, you can always rip these things out if you go bankrupt, and if you do grow exponentially, you add more and you add more quickly. And I think analysis paralysis is quite often what takes hold in this industry with customers. They just can't make a decision. And by the time it is absolutely critical for them to automate, it's almost too late. They've lost market share. Their competitors have caught up to them. I mean, I think Amazon and Walmart have really set the pace for automating within the four walls. And I think the more that companies start to take a page out of their book and take that leap in automation and do so strategically, knowing that they can scale up, scale down, sideways and backwards, I think that's going to make a big difference for a lot of companies out there. And I appreciate it, Joe. Listen, nobody knows more about automation than you and the team at Hy-Tek. So I'm honored to have been invited on here and share what little thoughts I have on this topic.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. That's great to hear. All right. Well, hey, listen, thanks for tuning in, watching the Automation Insider with us one more time. You can follow us anywhere you guys listen to podcasts. Check us out on Spotify, actually. And we'll have some more interesting content pretty soon. So thanks for tuning in.